Hello guys, this is Frosty and welcome to another video. So today I'm reacting to a YouTube I've reacted to before. That video actually did poorly, but it doesn't matter. I still wanted to talk about this, and I was meaning to do this video like a long time ago, but things got into the way. So now we can get into it. So the basic idea of this video is simple. She's talking about submission and should women submit to their man, and she actually brings up good points, and I'm going to address all of these points when we get there, but I'm also going to criticize some of the ideas that she presents, because she basically illustrates a lot of problems that men and women have in today's age, whether you're from the West or you're from Africa, and most of her examples are more African based, mostly Zimbabwean based, so that's where my arguments are also going to be coming from, so we can understand where her problem is and where the men she's talking about, where their problems are. So we can actually get into the video with that intro there, and let's hear what she has to say. All right, so let's go on.
Really great way. Let's get into it. So Paul speaks about the whole submission thing, and
okay, so one thing already that we can take away from this, one thing that you need to take away or to know beforehand, she's going to be using the Bible as the basis of what she's saying, where her arguments are coming from, and that's fine, that's okay, doesn't matter. I just wanted you to know that, so that you understand what this Paul is she's talking about. But basically, I don't like using the Bible as an argument tool, because sometimes when using a Bible, you're using something with an unchallenged authority, if you know what I mean. Meaning that sometimes if you're a Christian challenging the Bible, you're basically saying the rule book that's set for you is inferior, you have to argue it. Like sometimes it brings up a rhetoric like that, and it makes it hard to argue anything against it. That's why I don't usually like to use the Bible as an argument standpoint, but the way she uses it, she's actually good at it. So I'm going to basically criticize what she says as she interprets the Bible. I'm going to try my best not to use the Bible so much to argue, but where it's appropriate, I'm going to use the Bible. So yeah, let's continue.
Ephesians 5 verses 21 to 33. But a lot of people tend to focus on verse 22 only. It says, women submit.
Okay, so one other thing, her editing of her videos is just something else. So it took me a while to actually get used to it. So get used to it. Just get used to it, because she basically cuts off some points that she's saying, then she says something else sometimes, and it's unpleasant. But well, let's just continue. It doesn't matter. Let's just continue and get into what she's saying.
Your husbands, but the entire verse, the entire passage 21 to 33 reads as follows. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, submit yourselves to your husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her.
All right, so that's one issue I have with feminism, and I noticed this with the Western feminists, and I'm actually seeing the same thing, which means that maybe she's getting the same doctrine from the third wave, whatever, feminists from the West. Is basically that when she presents an argument, she doesn't realize that when she's now trying to bring up a point, she negates half of the text that she read in order to get to the point that she truly cares about. So for example, in the Bible, the verses that she was reading, if we actually go back to the verse, it basically says, wives, submit to your husbands and all that, right? On verse 22, as you can see on the screen, so as you do to the Lord, basically that, right? This, I'm just taking what is written here. I'm not going to go grab my own Bible. I'm just going to take I'm just going to take from her side of all of this. And it basically says, wives, submit to your husbands and all that, right? And then later on, when you move on to the next thing, let's just move on to the next thing. Okay, this part, the part that she truly highlighted, the part that she cares about alone. So she's basically saying, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and all that. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, husbands are supposed to love their wives. Otherwise, and love can mean a lot of things, but let's just take it as the raw term as it is, like love. Yes, husbands, when you're marrying someone, you have to marry someone you love at a certain extent, right? And most men actually do love their wives. It's funny that a lot of people try to argue against this, because if that wasn't the case, marriages would be very, very low, like extremely low, especially in Zimbabwe. A lot of people are married, a lot of people are staying married. And yes, there are a lot of people who are divorcing and all that. It's because that love has run out. But the the substitute of what she says is happening with husbands and their wives, in the sense that husbands are not loving their wives. She's basically saying husbands rape and all that, of which that's in the minority of the situation. If you actually look around on social media in Zimbabwe, what people are sharing and all that, you actually see that a lot of women are actually cheating on their men. It's because they don't want to submit to that the husband. So obviously she's going to submit to another man, and the way they submit to that other man is by sleeping with them. So her argument doesn't work in the sense that, well, you're basically saying that husbands love your wives, but a lot of these wives, I'm saying a lot, I'm not saying most, a lot of these wives are not basically submitting to their men. So why would they love their wives in that situation? I'm not saying that they're going to end up raping their wives and all that, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that if you're not going to submit, I'm not going to love you, right? It's just the basic gist. It's just the basic gist of it, but she's basically missing that. But let's go on, because there's a certain point that I need to attack, but we had to come to the beginning of her argument for you to understand where I'm coming from. So let's go on.
Your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her.
Hold up. Wait a minute.
Do you realize how much Christ loved the church? He died for the church. He died for the church. I think that's another reason why I struggled to understand the concept of submission, because I'm an African woman. Have you seen the femicide rates in Africa? Have you seen the femicide rates in Africa? As an African woman, I am more likely to be killed by a man than the likelihood of a man dying for me. That's
all right. So the problem with this argument that I have is that geography, right? Geography. If you look at, you can't, there are certain countries where women are killed, they're I don't know, maybe the Rwanda or something like that, or Congo, where women are raped, it's the rape capital of the world, basically, of planet Earth. And I understand where she's coming from if she's talking about Rwanda, but we're not in Rwanda right now. We are in what? We're in Zimbabwe, for example. And in Zimbabwe, wives are not being raped at the rate she's espousing right now. She then tries to hide by using the word Africa. This is what I'm picking up. She's trying to hide behind her point. She's trying to basically give power to her point by saying Africa. But if you look at Zimbabwe, men are not raping their wives. This is not something that's common or people are discussing all the time. Oh yeah, by the way, I raped my wife. That's not what's happening in Zimbabwe. And she's saying that Christ loved the church to the point where he died for it. A lot of women these days, they don't do the specific things that women are expected to do, because she's saying she expects a man to love his wife. And if the woman is not doing her role, she's not going to be loved. And I'm not saying she's going to be raped, but a man is basically not going to give her much like this. And this usually happens if a marriage gets to this point. It's usually because it's over time. So for example, if a woman decides to be lazy in the marriage, for example, she decides to be lazy, she's no longer doing what she wants to do. And let's just say she's doing some of the stuff, but she's not just having sex with her husband, because that's one of the reasons why men marry, right? Because once you are married, you can now have sex with a woman for the rest of your life. That's basically one of the trade-offs of marriage. That's one of the things that you expect from marriage, right? That you're gonna have sex with your wife, you love her and all that. But then if she's not giving you that, how are you going to love her? And it's not most men, good men out there, because most people are good. These men are not going to rape their wives, even if they're refusing with sex. Usually they're just going to stomach it because, well, you're going to have to stay together if you're going to have a healthy family with your kids and all that. You're going to stay together. But these men, they're not getting their justice. They're not getting what they were promised from a marriage, right? And then obviously they're not going to love their wives. And then when these wives notice that their men are acting like this, instead of saying, well, I'm not giving him sex, it's not really his fault, they're basically going to start saying men are trash. And that's the problem I have with the idea of men are trash, that. And then they start saying, why would I submit to my man? Well, if you're not going to submit to your man by giving him sex, he's not going to love you as much as you want him to love you. It has to be fair. It has to be fair. So that's basically my point with all of this, right? So let's continue. I'm trying to forget some of the things that she said in the past, but we're not going to go back. So let's just move on.
Put that into perspective. To make her holy, cleansing her by washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. I'll read that again for emphasis. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his...
Like I said, she only cares about the part that husbands need to love their wives. So what are these wives doing to deserve that love? Because one thing that women don't understand and think that they do, because they want to take everything and say they control. Men control access to relationships and marriage, and women control access to sex. And this is not something that I just figured out. No. I actually learned it from someone else. And when I heard it being said, it made sense. All right, because a lot of women actually complain about relationships, saying, "Oh, my boyfriend doesn't love me. My boyfriend is not doing this. This guy doesn't want to be my boyfriend." Usually, women complain about these things. And this lesson, I learned it from Kevin Samuels, right? Kevin Samuels on YouTube. If you actually go to his YouTube channel, he talks about this a lot, and he has this show that he does, and I watch it a lot. But what he basically preaches is that men control access to relationships and women control access to sex. So the disadvantage that women have in this situation now is that sex is something that men can now get anyway. So if you basically say, "Well, I'm not going to give you sex," men can get it elsewhere, because there are a lot of women out there who are willing to basically just give up sex, right? You just have to go on a date with a romancer, that you can get sex from her without actually giving a relationship. So men in that rhetoric actually have more options, right? And then these wives think they can still get away with denying men sex. So then that's why she keeps on going to the idea of saying, "Well, why will husbands have to love their wives? If they don't love their wives," she basically now says that if they don't love their wives, they're basically going to start raping their wives and all that. But then the question that has to be asked is that if your husband is not loving you, what did you do to be in that situation where you're not being loved, right? So yeah, that's basically how I see this.
His wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body, just as Christ does the church. For we are members of his body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I am talking about Christ and the church. However, each one of you must also love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. So that's basically what it reads. And my main takeaway from this whole thing, I don't know why when the church or church leaders, pastors, preachers, people, when they speak on this passage, they mostly focus on, wives submitting to their husbands, but they don't talk as much about, how the husband is supposed to love his wife as Christ loved the church. Christ died for the church. So that's an even, in my opinion.
All right, so she brings up a very good point, and it's that, well, let's just say that most of the churches that I've visited, I'm not going to cite names, but a lot, not most, a lot have a certain bias. Obviously, people are going to have biases. People are people. People will always be people. There are going to be biases everywhere, and it makes sense to a certain extent that someone would want their way of thinking basically trump other people. So if they're in a position of power, they're most probably going to basically use that bias to get whatever they want. And she's right. There are many churches out there who just preach that women should do that, without actually addressing what the men need to do, which is unfair, and which is something that needs to be fair in the sense that if you're going to basically open up a door for certain things to happen, also open those doors for both sides. If men are supposed to do certain things, then women are supposed to. Then you also need to talk about what women are supposed to do, and the other way around. If you're going to talk about what women are supposed to do, you need to also talk about what men are supposed to do in contrast. That's fine. And this part of the argument, I agree with her. So with that said, I don't think I can actually comment more. We can watch more of what she's saying, but just so we're clear, this part I totally agree.
That's an even bigger responsibility. Women are being told to submit to their husbands, but husbands are being told to love their wives as Christ loved their church, which is a really big responsibility. And I love that Paul goes on to say husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself as your own body. So if you wouldn't do it to yourself, or you wouldn't like anyone doing it to you, you shouldn't do it to anyone else. And I do think more emphasis needs to put, the church ought to put more emphasis on this section, because at the end of the day,
yes, they have to put emphasis on that, but also we can go back to what I was just saying previously. Like, these things are a double thing. you basically have to look at it in a double, like in a way of no, not in a double way, but in a one way, in the sense that you need to address both sides. Men are to love their wives if those wives are what? Are submitting. Because I can't, if like you said, you use the example of saying that submission and all that, right? If you're not going to submit, that means that there are a lot of things that you're not going to do for the husband, to the point where he's not going to love you. So that also needs to be addressed, right? So you need to talk about it and say women need to do this, men have to do this, then they cooperate. Because cooperation is the most important thing that you need to have in a marriage. At least that's what I've seen from my parents in a lot of successful marriages. Cooperation. She just wants the man to love the wife without addressing, is the wife doing something to earn that love, for example. So that's one thing that she needs to address. We can move on.
Wouldn't beat the church. Christ wouldn't rape the church. Christ wouldn't treat the church the way a lot of men nowadays treat their wives. Period.
To be honest, I think the world has moved to a point where, especially if you talk about Zimbabwe, we've moved on to a point where a lot of men actually don't do all these things. Yes, there's a high chance that in the past people used to do that, but in this day and age, you don't hear every day a different case of someone who's been raped, a woman who's been raped by a wife, by a husband, and all that stuff. So her to say it like that, she's basically like, if you drop an alien from space, like if an alien came from Mars and landed on Earth, and they would basically watch this video, they would quickly think that, well, a lot of men are raping their wives. Like, that's one thing they're going to pick up, and that's not the case. That's not the case. You actually see a lot of cases where women are being caught cheating on their husbands. And yes, you might argue that the ways that they deal with it, like recording them and putting that on the internet and all that stuff, sure, you can have an argument of how unethical or how that can be a bad thing, right? But they still need to address all these things. She's only addressing one side of the equation. You're not asking like questions like what are women doing to earn this love? These questions are not being answered. So that's the issue that I have with the thing. So I think we can watch a little bit more, and then we can move on from the topic in the video.
And that's not a period. That's what I have to say. And I feel like a lot of my reluctance in terms of submission was rooted in the way that I've seen relationship world, where we've seen, men are trash. Like, I don't mean this. Men are trash does not talk about men cheating, although that is also a really disrespectful, awful thing that men do. Men are trash speaks on how women, before anything else, the number one thing that are killing women are men. And 2/3 of the men who kill women, they're who they know in their personal life, so it can be.
Okay, these stats, you're going to need to cite where you get these stats, all right? Because, well, I think I'll actually do some research and put it, if I remember while I'm editing this video, I'll put it up and you see the stats. But basically, she talked about that she's seen this a lot, and this is where I think this is coming from. So there's a situation where, if you look at her right now, this girl on the screen right now, and you'd rate her, I'm not going to give my rating, but I would safely say that if you're going to grab, like, let's just say, we know that there's a top % of women that are extremely attractive, right? And there's that other range of the let's just say average girls, these average girls, right? And then there's the very, like, the girls that you can classify as not as attractive or not attractive, right? And if you look at her, she would fall in the lower range of the average girls type of thing, at least how I see it. I'm not going to give it a number, but basically that's how I see it. She falls in the average, and most probably at the lower side of that average of the girls that, when it comes to attractiveness. And she would basically get a treatment from guys where guys probably would just want her for what she offers physically, right? Which means sex and all that. That's what that's what a lot of guys might how can I put this, might value from her, because a lot of guys would want to get the top % of girls, but usually those girls would go for the rich guys or the top guys, and then most average men would actually just take her, for example. But then in a lot of situations these days, a lot of guys don't want to commit anymore, because relationships don't benefit guys, like, they don't benefit guys as much. And she would start to, so when a guy approaches her, he basically wants to have fun with her, and then she doesn't just want fun. She obviously wants to have happen with this, but then a lot of guys don't, they just want to have fun. So she basically then starts saying that a lot of men do this, a lot of men do that. It's because she's not understanding why that's happening. And I'm not saying this happened to her. It just, the way she's presenting her arguments looks like that's what happened to her. So obviously when these things happen, instead of just, trying to understand, because it's not just about guys wanting sex and all that from girls. You can also look at personalities and all that. Does her personality live up to the type of guys that she's dating, for example? Are these guys leaving her because of her personality? And the fact that she's a feminist, I basically, because it's actually, it says it here, she's a feminist, right? And it says here that since she's a feminist, a lot of guys don't like that vibe that feminists bring in, because she's basically trying to, a lot of feminists are combative in relationships. So a lot of guys don't need that, because you can just find another girl who doesn't do that, and she doesn't get that. So then a lot of girls don't get, when she's rejected for another person, they don't get that it has to be something wrong with the men, is what she starts to think. So yes, it wouldn't be surprising to have these arguments from her, because if she's not going to submit, for example, because a lot of feminists don't do that, guys will find girls who submit, and then she'll start to bring up arguments like the one she's bringing up. So I think I'll end it there. That's basically the gist of this whole situation. You can say whatever you want about submission and all that, but I think submission is basically the cooperation of the two, right? And since men control access to the relationship, you have to come to his terms, because the relationship are going to be under his terms, just as having sex with a woman is going to be under her terms. So it's a trade-off, but they don't want to have that trade-off. They want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to be able to control the relationship and sex so that they can do whatever they want, right? And a lot of men are waking up, they don't want that, and they are no longer benefiting from men who usually fall for that trap. And a lot of men are no longer falling for that trap. So yeah, I think I'll end there. This is Frosty. If you like what you see, just like the video, and you can also, comment your ideas and all that, and we can basically live it like that. So yeah, good day.